Thank you, Santiago, for the kind introduction, and thank you to Hector for the invitation to speak here. So I feel very honored to be here. So my talk will look at the corporate implications of 3D printing, and in particular the project we did for the UK Intellectual Property Office. I also thought it might be useful to start off by giving a little bit of background about the project, what was expected, and then after that look at the intellectual property implications, the copyright implications. So the UK Intellectual Property Office commissioned this project in 2013. It was a tender, and we won this tender, and the title was the Provisional Research for 3D Printing and Intellectual Property Law, Where Are We Now? And the question of where are we now, that was really the important question, based on the fact that there was limited literature at the time, limited empirical evidence as well, and really to understand whether anything should be done right now. Are we at the Napster moment? Are we at this position where, something should be done? Is there a lot of pirating going on? Is there a lot of counterfeiting going on? So that's what the Intellectual Property Office wanted to understand. And our project looked at two different elements. The first element is very much consumer-based, and it was a quantitative analysis of online sharing platforms. And for this, we looked particularly, I should say there are hundreds and hundreds of platforms that specialize in this type of activity and where people share 3D designs, 3D models, but we focus particularly on the top 17, where the mass is. The second aspect of our project was very much industry-based. And here we looked at 6 case studies and from 3 different industrial sectors. So in particular, we looked at the replacement parts, we looked at customized goods, and also high-value small status goods. So that's a little bit about a very brief overview of the project. As Santiago mentioned as well, it was published and completed in March 2015. There's a few of us who worked on it, so I'm speaking today, but there was a team of us. Myself, Dr. David Eseki used to be at Bournemouth, but now is at the University of Southern Denmark, and Dr. Phil Reeves, who is, we partner with Phil's company, Econolis, but now Econolis has been taken over by Stratasys, one of the biggest 3D printing companies in the world, and so he's the vice president of strategic consulting at Stratasys. We had 3 outputs, 2 studies, study 1, study 2, and an executive summary. So this is just a caption of study 1. This is the one which focuses on online platforms. As I said, 17. We look particularly at copyright implications in this study. We look at copyright implications of design files. We look what happens in the case of scanning, also modification of 3D models. And then there's the empirical aspect, which looks at, what is it that people share? How are they sharing? What type of licenses? Are they paying for these? So that kind of aspects we have looked at in this report. Our second report is the one on the industry, the current status and impact of 3D printing within the industrial sector. And as I mentioned, we looked at 3 sectors. And here again, in this report, however, we looked at all the different types of IP. So we look at patents, trademark, design, and trademark in those 3 industrial sectors. But for today's purposes, as this is a copyright session, I will focus on the copyright aspects. Finally, our executive summary, of course, sets out the findings, the conclusions, and then ultimately we make some recommendations for the UK government, for industry, as well as intermediaries as well. So that's a little bit of the overview of the full project. So I'm sure everyone knows what 3D printing is about. I know there was a workshop here as well on Wednesday, unfortunately, which I missed. But just maybe very quickly to recap and say that we say the word 3D printing a lot, but the actual technical term is additive manufacturing or additive layer manufacturing. And the reason why that is used is because you create 3D products or 3D models by printing successive layers of material. And of course, to do that, you need a particular type of software. And the most widely used software is computer-aided design software, which I say that in the 3rd bullet point. And that kind of leads me to the next slide, to the corporate implications. But I'm going to start out with 2 separate quotes. One is from a book that was written in 2013 by Lipson and Kerman, and they really do capture the essence of the importance of software when it comes to 3D printing. So they say in their book a 3D printer without an attached computer and a good design file is as useless as an iPod without music. And I think that really does capture the essence of that argument as to, the 3D printer will only work if there's some, if the software is there and if there's something to be printed. So that is a really important point. Interestingly, in 2013, there was another Santoso as well, who has written quite a lot in this in the States, and he says the object design file is similar to the architectural blueprints for a building or the sewing pattern for a dress. So I just wanted to kind of, put those two quotes out there. But at the same time, some of the interesting things that we looked at in our report was, in study one, was about modifying an object design file. So, what happens and, how is that done? There are tools, you can do it in that way, or you can scan. I mean, all the devices we have these days, it's easy to take a photograph, you can scan something, you can upload it to your computer, you can clean the file, and then you can potentially 3D print it. So let's look a little bit about how, how this happens. So first of all, I've got here a suite of apps. This is from one of the companies called Autodesk. And I should say as well, I'm going to go through some of the issues before I get into the substantive law. So here we have one of the issues, or I should say, this is the suite of apps, and you can see things like 1, 2, 3D Catch, the very first one. If you look at the third column, there's one called Mesh Mixer. So these basically allow a consumer, a DIY, as Professor Hargreaves, a DIY consumer or creator, to kind of, take a picture, remix, and these are the kind of words that are used. If you can see, I'm not sure that you can see that far, but you can, bring things together, and these are the kind of tools that can be used to kind of modify a file. So that's one way of doing it. Another way that might be a little bit more challenging in terms of copyright law is in terms of scanning. So a scanner for 3D printing is quite expensive, and if you were to buy it in the UK, it will cost you thousands of pounds and a few thousand of pounds. So it's quite an expensive item, and most consumers are not going to go out and buy a scanner. But this type of scanner, which is the MakerBot digitizer, which kind of captures small items, these are freely available. Well, they're available for a reasonable price. And for example, this one here is about, I think, 200 pounds. Still quite expensive, of course, when you look at it from a point of view of a printer, like a normal printer, but still. So this can scan little items like that, and I think if you can see the caption at the top, it says, quickly turn the things in your world into 3D models that you can modify, improve, share, and 3D print. I think those are kind of alarming words as well. If you think about it from a copyright perspective, that you can modify, improve, share, and 3D print, quickly turn these physical things into digital 3D models. But so that norm there sitting on the scanner, okay, if that item was to be scanned, let's have a look at, how that would turn out. So in this slide here, at the top right-hand corner, you have the scanned item. And then using the kind of tools that I mentioned previously in the 1, 2, 3D suite of apps, what you can do is you can add a hat, you can multiply, or you can change it to a certain extent. For example, they've put a pointy, or you put some pointy ears, change the beard a bit. So, so you can both scan and you can also change it using these tools. So I don't know if I can maybe go back quickly to the, yeah. So here's the original, the one, and so I don't know whether you can see, whether you would say that it's an exact replica of what you saw in the previous slide. But if you go forward, here you have, on the left, you've got the original norm that you saw sitting or on the scanner, and on the right-hand side is the scanned item. I would say, and I would argue that it's pretty similar. I mean, the only thing is it's come out in support material. It's white, so obviously it's got to be painted into the right color. But even if you paint it in different colors, can you call it a modification? Interesting question. So that's what you can expect to see from a not a very expensive scanner. And that kind of leads me nicely into some of the issues we looked at in study 2, which is we looked particularly at end-user products. And again, we looked at, as I said, different types of IP, but here I'm going to look at copyright. And I'm going to focus on the customized goods sector, because I really think that with 3D printing, the real potential is in customization. The very fact that you can go and, for example, if I earlier wanted to customize a ring, it's possible, but it's of course very expensive. 3D printing, and with the software we have, it is possible with some clicks, and if you understand the software, understand the program, you can actually customize it relatively easily. So here, and mass customization is something that is very relevant and quite, interesting in this area. It's not to say that it has not existed in the past, because there are things like Nike ID, which allow for mass customization. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got Audi A6 car, where the consumer could go and customize as they wish before they bought it. But 3D printing, of course, provides those kind of more opportunities. And in our project, we looked at and we spoke to a number of different companies. So in the industrial sector, in study 2, when we did our case studies, we spoke to various businesses. And in this sector, we spoke to Makey Lab, who does Makey dolls. We spoke to a company called Nervous System that does mass customization of jewelry. And we also spoke to a company called Digital Forming, amongst others. And Digital Forming does a variety of consumer products. I'm going to look particularly at Makey dolls and Digital Forming just to give you an idea of some of the issues that came up. So Makey dolls, I'm not sure how popular it is in Hamburg or rest of Europe, but in the UK it's really caught on. And what this is that you can have your own customized doll. What the Makey Lab does is they kind of provide a very basic doll. So you change from the hair, the eyes, the arms, the legs, the position. The doll could be skiing, the doll could be hill climbing, the doll could be just stationary. You can pretty much change anything you want, or there's a large spectrum of things that could be added or could be customized. Each doll also has a unique number assigned to that particular doll, and there's only one of that doll that will be shipped to the consumer. Of course, this kind of mass customization, if you go to Toys R Us, you might get a doll for 15 pounds, 20 pounds. So this type of doll is about 69 pounds or 70 pounds. But I think what's interesting here is that if, for example, they are giving, so the business model is such that you have that basic doll, you can customize it. But at the same time, they are also available just to buy off the shelf in shops like Hamleys in London, Selfridges in London. Also, you can buy on Amazon as well. But if this company is making this available for providing design freedom, then how much of the IP is being held back by Makey Labs? And how much of that modification done by a consumer is can the consumer say, oh, it's mine, I own the copyright in that, or I have the ownership in that. So that's an interesting question with them. This is Digital Forming, and they've got their own kind of business model, and I just put a picture there, but really what they're focusing here is on a tool set called Ukodo, and that is user co-design objects, being Odo, which is the original design object, and Kodo, co-design object. So there's a designer who presents a design to the consumers come forward, then they start mass customizing it as they wish using the Kodo software, and ultimately what you then have is this like a Ukodo product using the Ukodo tool set. What's there is there's acceptance by these companies that there is an original creator and then a number of co-creators. If that is the case, and that was something that was also alluded to by Professor Hargreaves as well, if you have one creator and then all these other creators come and change it, again I come to that question of, well then, what are the issues, for example, what are the issues in terms of authorship, ownership, and so in that slide there I talk about in study 1, if for example you change products or file using tools, or you scan, is it an infringement? And we looked at that norm, and I would argue that it would be an infringement. It's very similar. But if, for example, there's a blurring as well between the creator and the co-creators. In the case of Makey dolls or Digital Forming, where there's an acceptance of this kind of creator, co-creator, I think that really important question is this ownership. Who owns it? The authorship, and also the originality. So let's kind of dig a little bit into those issues. And what we did as well was to answer those questions, we applied traditional law and looked at European law as well as, of course, UK law, since it was a project for the UK Intellectual Property Office. So what we know from the European law, from cases like Infopack, Paler, Football, Dataco, is that ultimately to warrant copyright, what is needed is the author's own intellectual creation, or there has to be creative choices made by the creator. So modifying an object design file, like for example the GNOME, that obviously you wouldn't say that there is a creative choice on the part of the creator or the personal touch is seen, but maybe it's different when it comes to the other products we saw with dolls or with the digital forming. In the UK, we have a number of cases that looks at this same concept. We have the test of skill, labor, effort, and judgment, this old, very old test. But in Intellego and Tyco, for example, the court said that what is really important is to look at some element of material alteration or embellishment. And what this means is that it shouldn't be a slavish copy. For example, maybe a scan copy. So I might spend from 9 a.m. till 9 p.m. tracing a picture, a lot of skill, labor, effort, and judgment, and yet it is ultimately like tracing a picture. It's like a slavish copy. So it doesn't warrant copyright. So again, what we're looking at is there like a visual change, a visual, like a modification from the from the previous product. So as I already mentioned about the acceptance of the creator and the co-creator, but then how far do they allow the customer to go, and how much can you customize without, in fact, what is their business model? So interestingly, right now, I should say that with companies like Digital Forming and even Makilab, they have a closed loop business model, which means that everything that the customer is using, in a way, has been presented to them. All these companies that we spoke to want to go further because they realize the potential of 3D printing lies in giving more freedom, more design freedom to the consumer. Because, of course, even today we can customize. We can go to lots of websites and do a little bit of customization. But the more freedom you give, the more opportunities you kind of open up, the better it is in this context. So, but right now it is a closed loop business model, which means there's a lot of opportunities, but it's still, closed in the company. So, which means the consumer, in effect, doesn't really own any IP because it's all being given to the consumer. This is a very. Do I have another few minutes? 3 minutes. Okay. So very quickly, I'll talk about this point here. This is in terms of 3D models, sculptures, and this is a section that we have in the UK, where it says that for protection of digital models of artistic works manufactured on industrial scale, and if more than 50 of those are created, then the protection is actually 25 years. So it's not the usual copyright term. And this is a very strange section of Section 52 of the UK law. And the final bullet point, if you look at it, it says it is not copyright in the design itself, but copyright in the design document. So like I've been talking about design documents, and that's the kind of thing which this section is also getting at. And there's a very interesting case, very popular case, Lucasfilm and Ainsworth. It was to do with the Star Wars Stormtrooper helmets, where Lucasfilm created that for the film, but Andrew Ainsworth had done the plastic molding. The 25 years lapsed. Andrew Ainsworth started selling it. Lucasfilm took issue with it. And the question was, whether that is protected, whether after the design right has finished, whether, for example, this copyright continued. And the court in the UK said that copyright exists in the film, not in these sculptures, not in these kind of models, because that is functional. So in effect then what they were saying is that this can only happen if the sculpture has some form of artistic merit. Of course, if this was the case, this is really not very good for a manufacturer, because once the term expires of the design or in that kind of functional product, then that will be the end. But this section actually is being repealed in the UK. It won't happen till 2020, but the reason why I put it there is to kind of highlight these kind of jurisdictional issues that do come up in copyright. And that's just one example from the UK. We did also look at the US a little bit as well. I won't go into that now, but there are very interesting issues that do come up when you look at different copyright systems and the kind of issues that come up in 3D printing. To finish off, what I would say is that in our project and looking at the copyright implications, what we did, our conclusion, looking at the platforms and looking at and speaking to businesses, is that the activity on online platforms is still quite minimal. In the sense there is a lot of activity, but piracy, counterfeiting is still quite minimal. It is not widespread. So therefore, to do anything right now, we felt would be counterproductive, and our recommendation to the UK IPO was to adopt a wait-and-see approach. But also, our recommendation was to, in fact, to adapt to the technology and adopt new business models. And we felt that kind of a holistic approach of coming at it, maybe with some IP as well, but really looking at those business models, and we gave some examples like Authentized Toy Fab. These will be the way forward. So thank you for listening. Sorry if I went over time. I'm happy to take questions later.